Today we have a very special topic. We're discussing water conservation techniques for people who live in rented housing. We are consultants of the Alameda County Resource Conservation District, and in this episode, we aim to land at a pitch for water conservation techniques for renters and beyond that can be used to better California's water usage. Leon, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited to show this little design concept that we developed for an eco-visualization tool to share with the water consumer how much water they're consuming and to create some awareness raising process down the line.
Yeah. So, do you want to share maybe a little bit as to how we landed at this topic? Is it personal to you in any way? Kind of just a little background as to how we got to this point.
Yeah, so I live in a household with no dishwasher. So we wash all of our dishes by hand. And I've noticed that my habits are very loose around like conserving water. The water keeps running a lot. So I'm assuming that my water consumption is very high in the kitchen compared to other parts of the household.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have a very similar experience with water usage. I also live in a rented apartment, and uh, I have no concept of how much water I'm using. Most of that reason is because I don't see a water bill. So my landlord and many landlords across the state of California just pay the water bill for the properties that they own, which leaves renters and tenants out of the loop on how much water usage they're consuming, which is a large problem when you don't know how much you're using. It doesn't encourage you to use any less.
Right, yeah, it's the same for me. There's one meter for the entire building of 4 units. And I once got an email from my landlord that we used 30% more water than the year before we moved in, essentially, suggesting that maybe our movement was resulting in higher water usage, but as broad as that, it stays.
Yeah. So I guess I want to get into what we kind of researched along the way, and how we landed at the device that you briefly touched on. So I know that we did some research on some behavioral change methods as the root of the issue. Do you want to expand on those just a little bit?
Yes, so in general, we were wondering, right, so we have the background of half of renters in the US not having dishwashers in their kitchen. And without a dishwasher, you use 3 to 4 times more water for washing your dishes. And because this usage of water is like a very high frequency almost every day, and it's a large amount of water, it's a pretty good place for a intervention. So there are like a few, I guess, like design ways to think about it, and one is like nudging. So you could create physical little prompts to make the positive behavior easier. So for instance, there could be a physical design that helps to reduce water consumption. Like a foot pedal would be an interesting design prompt to just like help make the behavior of consuming less water easier for the consumer. or in a shower to make it easy to turn the shower on and off. But then we were also looking at intervention techniques and drew some inspiration from the complex systems thinking world. So complex systems can be social systems. And within these social systems, you can intervene in various ways. And it's often helpful to have positive incentives, negative incentives. But the most important one is to change the place from which people operate. So essentially change their paradigms. So we were thinking it would be nice to create some form of intervention tool that helps people change the place from which they operate, essentially reflect and raise their awareness, and change the way they exist in this world, by changing their paradigms.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And I like how you mentioned that it's transferable across all different points of usage across the house, the shower, the faucets, the dishwasher, the washing machines. But I guess for certain solutions are more easily implementable for different points of use. So I want to kind of focus on maybe the dishwasher and this eco visualization tool that you have briefly showed us here, and kind of dive into how that would really work, and how it's necessarily hooked up, what it's showing you, and why that's causing the consumer to want to use less.
Right. Yeah. So the tool is essentially a meter. So the water flows through it, and this little thing here spins. And by that, the microcontroller figures out how much water is flowing through it. And that is a very numerical way of approaching it, which, now you could say the consumer knows they consumed 1.68 liters. But because numbers can be a little confusing, and we don't often have a very precise understanding of volumetric units, we thought it would be nice to visualize the consumption and relate it to real world things. So we came up with two design ideas. The first one is to have a glowing drop that is next to the faucet, and it changes color based on your daily consumption, and it will change to a dark red if you're exceeding your daily consumption, which is roughly 12 gallons, because a household per capita consumes around 46 gallons, and only around 1/3 or less should be used in the kitchen. So that drop would change its color. And then the second part would be to induce this reflection process on the consumer end. So now the consumer is wondering, how much water did I use though? And then they can engage with the second component, which would be a little screen that tells them your water usage of today relates to a certain amount of produce. So to make it specific, if they consumed 12 gallons of water during a day, which would is at the threshold of what they should consume per person in the kitchen, they would learn that with that water they could have grown 4 carrots, or 1 medium-sized potato, or 5 grams of beef. And to give them these relational this relational understanding of their consumption, it might not directly affect the way they wash their dishes, but it might affect them on a deeper level by reflecting on their consumption habits in their life. And maybe it's more impactful if they eat less beef, for instance, than using less water in the kitchen. So on that second sense, the paradigm change here is the more driving intervention point.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see how that would be really impactful for somebody to have the comparison of their water usage in, say, their kitchen versus water required to grow certain crops. Um, I I'm curious as to what the best method is for implementation. So this seems like a solution that is not necessarily trying to dive into the policy side, but and probably take some experimentation to prove out this method before rolling out into a wider audience. But what do you see as some kind of initial experimentation and proof of concept for this device and this method?
Yeah, so I think we need to be honest that we have to prove that this is an effective method. Um, I have tried this method myself in the past with two other members living in my household, and both of them reported on a personal level that it changed their habits. But we would have to create some form of study to study the effect of this. A good place to study it would be a apartment complex and compare the water consumption before installation and after installation. Another potential place for like raising awareness could be a school where children engage with early on in their lives with this relational understanding of water in comparison to other parts of their lives. And it might just be kind of a snowball effect as they use this device, they talk to each other. And
yeah, you know, I can see this really being effective in many different public spaces, gyms, libraries, schools, like you mentioned.
Right, yeah.
So not even, or I mean, an initial proof of concept would be great within the renter market, like we've studied, but I think once that is proved, it can be used wide and far beyond just people who rent to decrease water consumption.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the key component here is that people use water in spaces, but they don't know how much water is being used because they do not pay for the water, or there's general intransparency regarding water consumption. And then the second component is relating this water consumption to real things, so people have a better understanding of what the water consumption means. I could imagine, like in a gym that compares their water consumption with last year, and now they roll out this campaign saying we want to reduce water consumption. Let's try to make this happen. And then they say, well, we reduced our consumption so much that we could have made 500 meals out of this.
Yeah.
I think that could be a powerful way of describing the impact that the community made.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, well, we're running out of time for this episode, but Leon, I appreciate you as always for tuning in to another episode of Mesh Talks. Sounds like we have a really promising experiment ahead of us, and one that can be really impactful for water conservation in the state of California. So thanks for joining and talking about your device, and we'll talk next time.
Thank you. Talk to you
Right.
soon. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.